Hello everyone, welcome to Study Room. I'm Kanika and I'm going to be your educator for this lesson in English, that is, the Sermon at Benares. I hope you learn as well as comprehend this chapter to the best of your ability. Let's get started. The Sermon at Benares. Before we look into the chapter, it's extremely important for us to know a little bit about the author. So let's now look into the author for this lesson. Betty Renshaw is the author and the writer for this lesson. She was born in Shannon, Mississippi, and is majorly known for her religious writings. She gained popular acclaim for her book Values and Voices. So, from this particular illustration, you can see that this is who Betty Renshaw is. Moving ahead. Let's now look into the theme of the story. The story narrates the journey of Prince Siddhartha Gautam from leading a royal life to attaining enlightenment as the Buddha. In his first sermon at Benares, he helped a grieving mother come to terms with the loss of her only son. However, it's also important to know that the prince that we are referring to over here, that is Gautam Buddha, after leading for 10 years of fulfilling life as a married man, was moved by a sight and set out to gain enlightenment. Buddha found his enlightenment in the city of Benares under the famous tree, which is the Bodhi tree, which is also now known as the tree of wisdom. The story helps us realize that all mortals will have to die one day, and although the grief is unbearable, we have to accept the reality and truth of life. Moving on, we see that Siddhartha Gautam is the person here in this illustration. Royal life refers to a luxurious life. Enlightenment as such refers to a state of being. So as you can see that there is a certain yellow light over here, which is called as the halo, is what symbolizes enlightenment. In his first sermon at Benares, as we can know, that he helped a grieving mother come to terms with the loss of her only son. Grieving refers to someone who is sad and crying. Moving forward. The sermon at Benares. Gautam Buddha, who was born on 1563 BC and died in 483 BC, began life as a prince who was named Siddhartha Gautam in northern India. At the age of 12, he was sent away for schooling in the Hindu sacred scriptures, and 4 years later, he returned home to marry a princess. So, prince is usually referred to as somebody who is the son of a king. Hindu sacred scriptures here as a term refers to certain religious writings which are often used for the purposes of education. Princess is referred to as somebody or as a girl who is the daughter of a princely family. They had a son and lived for 10 years as befitted royalty. At about the age of 25, the prince, that is Gautam Buddha, heretofore shielded from the sufferings of the world, while out hunting, chanced upon a sick man, then an aged man, then a funeral procession, and finally a monk begging for alms. So we can see that Gautam Buddha and his wife had a son, and they lived for around 10 years as befitted royalty. Befitted royalty refers to as people who belong to the line of royalty. However, at the age of around 25, the prince realized about the grave sufferings that existed in the world. Sufferings like that of somebody who is sick, of somebody who is aging, and somebody who just died. Upon realizing about all of these sufferings, Buddha was extremely moved. And at that point of time, he realized that this is not exactly the life that he wants to live. Along with this, he also came across a monk, that is, a person who lives a life of religious simplicity. Begging for alms. Alms as a word refers to donations. These sights, that is, the sight of the aged, of the monk begging for alms, as well as that of a funeral, moved him that he at once went out into the world to seek enlightenment concerning the sorrows he had witnessed. So, he wanted to gain a certain form of being. After coming across all of these sufferings and sorrows that he had just witnessed, he wandered, that is, he went from place to place for 7 years and finally sat down under a peepal tree. You can see that this is what a peepal tree looks like. It is a peepal tree where he vowed to stay until enlightenment came. Vowed is a certain kind of promise. Enlightened after 7 days, he renamed the tree the Bodhi tree. So basically, the tree under which Buddha gained enlightenment was called as the Bodhi tree, and began to teach and to share his new understandings that he got post enlightenment. These new understandings were basically certain views that Buddha had on life and living, as to how the ideal and the best way to live and practice one's life is. Let's now see what the chapter has in store for us. At that point, he became known as the Buddha, the awakened or the enlightened. The Buddha preached his first sermon at the city of Benares, most holy of the dipping places on the river Ganges. So, Buddha, who was Siddhartha Gautam, came to be known and referred by this name. Buddha refers to as the awakened or the enlightened one. He preached means taught. His first sermon. Sermon is a kind of a religious or spiritual talk. In the city of Benares, Benares is a city in the state of Uttar Pradesh, which is one of the most holy of the dipping places. Holy refers to religious. And river Ganges is nothing but what we called as Ganga. That sermon has been preserved and is given here. It reflects the Buddha's wisdom about one inscrutable kind of suffering. So, that particular religious and spiritual talk and interaction that Buddha had has now been preserved till date. You can see this from the illustration given here. Kisa Gautami had an only son and he died. In her grief, she carried the dead child to all her neighbors, asking them for medicine, and the people said, "She has lost her senses. The boy is dead." So here we are talking about a mother who is known as Kisa Gautami, and she had an only son who died. Because of her grief, she carried her dead child to all the neighbors asking for medicine and a certain kind of help. Upon seeing the woman look out for medicines and treatment for her child who was already dead, everyone said that she had gone mad. because the boy is already dead. At length, Kisa Gautami met a man who replied to her request. I cannot give thee medicines for thy child, but I know a physician who can. So, upon interacting from many people, Kisa Gautami finally met a man who replied to her request of helping her son get well and through medicines. That although the man cannot give her medicines for her child, but he knows a physician who can and who can help her out. A physician is a certain kind of a doctor or someone who sees the health of ill people. And the girl said, Pray tell me, sir, who is it? And the man replied, Go to Sakya Muni, the Buddha. Kisa Gautami repaired to the Buddha and cried, Lord and Master, give me the medicine that will cure my boy. So, upon being told that you must go to Sakya Muni or the Buddha, the grieving mother whose child had just died straightway went to Buddha and cried to him and said that and asked her, after having an interaction and a piece of talk with that particular man, the man directed the woman who was grieving about her child's death that she must go and see the physician who was known as Sakyamuni or the Buddha. After knowing that she must visit Sakyamuni or the Buddha for being helped out with her son's sickness, she went away to Buddha, and upon seeing Buddha, she burst into a cry and said to help her out and her son by giving her a certain medicine that will cure her son's disease and sickness. The Buddha answered, I want a handful of mustard seed. So, upon being asked for help by the grieving mother, Buddha asked in return that she must get him a handful of mustard seed. You can see that mustard seeds look like this. And when the girl in her joy promised to procure it, procure means collect or bring something. The mustard seed must be taken from a house where no one has lost a child, husband, parent, or friend. So, even though the woman agreed and realized that she would be able to get Buddha a handful of mustard seed, she was put through another demand wherein the mustard seed have to be bought from a house where nobody has lost a child, husband, parent, or friend. That is, nobody should have died in that particular house. Poor Kissa Gautami now went from house to house. House to house as a phrase refers to going to many houses. And the people pitied her and said, Here is mustard seed, take it. But when she asked, Did a son or daughter, a father or mother die in your family? Pitied is basically to show sympathy. They answered her, Alas, the living are few, but the dead are many. Do not remind us of our deepest grief. Deepest grief refers to a deep state of sadness and sorrow. And there was no house but some beloved one had died in it. Kissa Gautami became weary and hopeless. Weary and hopeless means extremely tired and almost giving up. She sat down at the wayside watching the lights of the city as they flickered up and were extinguished again. At last, the darkness of the night reigned everywhere. That is to say, that the sun had set and it was dark, which basically symbolizes the time of the day, which was the night, and she considered the fate of men, that their lives flicker up and are extinguished again. So, in the previous slide, we realized that as she was disappointed because she hardly found a house where there was even a single person who had not died, she sat there looking at the street lights flickering time and again. Upon seeing the flickering lights, she realized of a certain happening and fact of life. That is, that the lives of people, humans, and men flicker up and down again and again and are extinguished as well from time to time, which tell us that just how street lights can switch on and off, so are the lives of us humans, which can flicker up and then again get extinguished. And she thought to herself, how selfish am I in my grief? Death, in fact, is common to all. That is, everyone experiences it. Selfish means to only think about oneself or one's own interests. All yet, in this valley of desolation, there is a path that leads him to immortality who has surrendered all selfishness. Desolation means a certain sense of sorrow. There is a way that leads people to a state of immortality. It is only one who has surrendered all selfishness. So, upon realizing that how selfish Kisa Gautami is being, with regard to the sorrow that she felt about her son's death, she realized that it's not just her son who has died and it's not just her own grief, but there are a lot of people who have lost a loved one because of their death, and they all grieve that. So, instead of being selfish about her loss, she realized that death and the grief which comes with it is in fact common to all. However, in this path of saddened reality where death is common to all, she realizes that there is a way out to immortality. However, immortality as a state is only achieved by those few who have surrendered all forms of selfishness. That is, somebody who has given up all selfishness. The Buddha said, the life of mortals in this world is troubled and brief and combined with pain, for there is not any means by which those that have been born can avoid dying. After reaching old age, there is death. Of such a nature are living beings. So, in this particular thought by Buddha, Buddha says that the life of mortals refers to people and basically humans who die after a certain period. That is, they can't live forever. As we can say that they are the people who can't live forever, they're also the people who are troubled and with a certain kind of pain and grief that they live their lives with. For in the life, there are not just moments of mere happiness and joy, but an equal amount of pain and sorrow. And for this, it is not by any means that they have been born that they can avoid dying. By the mere fact of being born, it also presents us to the fact that we, as humans, die after a point of time of reaching old age. Such is the nature of death and birth. Such is also the nature of living beings, which all includes us. So, death is equally part of our realities. As ripe fruits are early in danger of falling, so mortals when born are always in danger of death. So, when a fruit is ripe, that is, when it is fit to be plucked from the tree and eaten, It is in a certain state of being ready to fall from the tree. Similarly, mortals, once they are born and in their world, they also, after growing up and at a certain age, always live in the danger of death. That is, death can also be a part of their life after a certain point of time. You can see that this is how ripe fruits fall from a tree. As all earthen vessels made by the potter end in being broken, so is the life of mortals, both young and adult, both those who are fools and those who are wise, all fall into the power of death. All are subject to that. So, in this particular part, the author represents a connection between the earthen vessels that are made by the potter and the life of mortals. The connection here is that when a potter makes a certain form of pottery, that pottery might look fresh and extremely shiny in the beginning. However, after a few years and days, the pottery breaks. So, everything that is made from the earth by the potter ends up in being broken, that is, no longer in use. Similarly, is the life of mortals, that is, people who don't live forever, that is, us human beings. We are also born as people who are young and have a beautiful life to live. However, after a certain point, there is also a form of demise that awaits us. That is, we as humans also need to die. Both young and adult, who are fools and those who are wise, all fall into the power of death, which means that it doesn't really matter as to who you are. It doesn't matter whether you are rich or poor. It doesn't matter whether you are extremely smart or a fool. The power of death is such that it holds and subjects all to it. No one, no mortal can escape the power and the event and the reality of death. Of those who overcome by death, depart from life, a father cannot save his son, nor kinsmen their relations. Mark, while relatives are looking on and lamenting deeply, one by one, mortals are carried off, like an ox that is led to the slaughter. So, this entire particular part tells us that death cannot be controlled by anyone. It is, in fact, a fact and reality of our lives. So, no father could save his son, nor kinsmen their relations. So, there is always a form of lament, that is, regret and sorrow about losing one's loved ones after after their death. So, the world is afflicted with the death and decay. Decay means a certain form of demise and end. Therefore, the wise are the people who do not grieve or become sad, knowing the terms of the world. That is, there are certain facts and realities of our world and of our lives as humans. We must be wise and not grieve or become sad and sorrowed by these facts of life. Facts like death and decay. Not from weeping, nor from grieving will anyone obtain peace of mind. On the contrary, his pain will be the greater and his body will suffer. So, no amount of crying or being sad will help anyone in any way. It will never give them any form of peace or happiness. But, on the other hand, what will give somebody peace, happiness, and satisfaction in his life will be by accepting the reality. Because if they don't accept the reality and the facts of the world and life, their pain and suffering will be greater, and in return, their body will suffer as well. He will make himself sick and pale. Yet the dead are not saved by his lamentation. He who seeks peace should draw out the arrow of lamentation and complain and grieve. So, somebody who keeps grieving and becomes sad by not accepting the realities of life will damage his mind and body. He will become sick and pale. And despite all this grieving, crying, and becoming sad, you cannot save the dead. That is, you can't bring back to life somebody who has died. On the other hand, somebody who seeks peace, acceptance, and happiness should draw out the arrow of all these forms of lamentation, regret, or any kind of grief. He who has drawn out the arrow of lamentation, grief, regret, and has become composed will obtain peace of mind. He who has overcome all sorrow will become free from sorrow and be blessed. So, somebody who draws out, that is, who removes the very option and the very state of regret, of grieving, of becoming sad or crying, will obtain a certain peace of mind and be happy with their life and the life of others, who will overcome and not get burdened by the sorrows of life, will become from the state of being sad and be truly blessed. That is, with all the nurture and longings of God. That is, they are in a state of peace, happiness, and satisfaction. There are a few key terms that we have come across in the chapter so far. It's extremely important for us to not just read those key terms, but also understand, learn, and know them better. So let's now see what these key terms are. Chanced upon, came across by chance. Enlightenment, a state of high spiritual knowledge. You can see Buddha in this illustration being in a state of enlightenment. As you can mention here, that this is what we saw at the beginning of the lesson, that this yellow circle is called as the halo, which represents the state of being enlightened or spiritually awakened. Sermon, religious or moral talk. You can see that this is how Buddha has given a religious or a moral talk to a group of people. Dipping places, there are places of bathing. You can see that this is what a particular form of ghat, that is a shore, looks like in a religious place where people come to take a holy dip. Inscrutable is something which cannot be understood. So, it can be a form of knowledge or a piece of writing that cannot be understood. You can look at this illustration and know that whatever is written over here is not understandable. Therefore, it is inscrutable. Repaired is a stylistic use which means went to. Valley of desolation means an area which is filled with deep sorrow. You can see that sorrow is a form of an emotion or a state of being which can be represented by the person in this illustration. Mortals are people who are bound to die. That are basically, mortals are people who are bound to die. That is basically us humans. Afflicted with means affected by suffering, disease, or pain. Lamentation means expression of sorrow or a certain form of regret over something that has been bad in somebody's life. You can see that lamentation as an expression is expressed by this boy. There are a few questions that we have come across in the chapter. Let's now look at these questions and know the chapter better. Question number 1. When her son dies, Kisa Gautami goes from house to house. What does she ask for? Why not? The answer to this question could be that after the death of her only son, Kisa Gautami was overcome with the sense of grief. She was extremely sad. Because of this, she carried the dead body of her son in her arms and went from door to door asking for medicine to cure her child. But nobody could provide any medicine to her child. For there is no such medicine that is available which can bring a dead person back to life. Moving ahead, question number 2. Isa Gautami again goes from house to house after she speaks with the Buddha. What does she ask for? The second time around? And does she get it? Why not? The answer to this question could be that Gautam Buddha asks Kisa Gautami to bring a handful of mustard seeds from a house where death had never struck anybody. Kisa Gautami went from door to door but couldn't find even a single house where death had not taken a beloved away. She could not get it as death is inevitable. That is, it has to come one time or the other. And anyone who is born to die one day. Let's now look at question number 3. Why does Kisa Gautami understand the second time that she failed to understand the first time? Was this what the Buddha wanted her to understand? So, after failing to procure a handful of mustard seeds from a house where death had never knocked at the door, she sat down by the roadside feeling extremely tired and helpless. At that point of time, she saw the lights of the city that flickered and were extinguished. Flickered means fluctuating. Sometimes in our house, the light fluctuates on and off. So we say that the lights are flickering. Extinguished. Extinguished means to blow out or finish. So, therefore, at last, after she saw the city lights flickering and extinguished time and again, she realized that there was darkness everywhere at last. It's at that point of time that Kisa Gautami understood that death was common to all and she was being extremely selfish in her grief over her dead son. Yes, this is what the Buddha wanted her to understand and know, that everyone who is born has to die one day. Question number 4. Why do you think Kisa Gautami understood this only the second time? In what way did the Buddha change her understanding? So, earlier, she could only see her own grief. That is, she was being extremely selfish about her only grief and did not realize that everyone has grief in their lives, especially over the death of a beloved. When she went on from door to door the second time, she understood that everyone was dealing with the loss of a beloved one. There was not even a single household in the town where death had not taken a father, a mother, a sister, a brother, a son, a daughter, or a relative. Everyone at some point or the other have experienced the death of their loved ones. Gautam Buddha helped her to understand all this. As he told her to bring a handful of mustard seeds from a house where death had never knocked at the door, this way she got aware and realized about the fact that death in fact is common to all human beings. Question number 5. How do you usually understand the idea of selfishness? Do you agree with Kisa Gautami that she was being selfish in her grief? Well, a selfish person is one who only thinks about themselves. And to some extent, Kisa Gautami was being selfish because we are humans and it is extremely natural for us to die. We do not easily accept the death of our loved ones. Same has happened with Kisa Gautami, as it was her only child and her son who died. She did not want him to die, and because of that, she even went on to Buddha to ask for a certain form of help in the medicinal form. Let's now go through a quick revision to make sure that we retain whatever we have learned and come across in this chapter. So let's revise. The story talks the journey undertaken by Siddhartha Gautam from being a prince to becoming Gautam Buddha or the Enlightened One. Gautam Buddha helps a grieving mother to come to terms, that is, to accept with the loss of her only son. He preaches that death is inevitable and we cannot hold on to our loved ones forever.